all of whom have earned their karmic style points by adding to the chat. You are welcome to do so as well. Just tell us where you're joining us from. And I'm excited to share some ideas with you as we go forward on this. So with that, let me agree to being recorded. I guess it would be a bit of a foul to find fault with that at this point. But yeah, welcome to the session. As you can see from the slide, a look at your school post-COVID, relevant, right? And we're going to look at this idea from a couple of different standpoints. Let me kind of jump you into some ideas first. In addition to the captions provided by the system through Zoom, I am also going to turn on my captions in Google Slides, which will make for one very long sentence, but it also means that the recording will have the captions. So thumbs up for that. Let's be accessible when we can, right? Absolutely. And then you're also going to see a lot of images. This is perhaps as much text as you'll see on the screen for the most part. I'm a big fan of thinking about how the images we use can enhance the ideas that are shared as part of a presentation. And if you're curious about some of those pieces as we go forward, feel free. I intend to leave enough time for us to talk about anything from the presentation that you look at and you think, I have a question about that. All good. Happy to share those ideas as we go. All right then. So thank you for taking part. I hope that you are excited to look at some ideas together. And thank you to the conferences that are making this happen, right? So we've got ELCC, we've got the Northwest Managers of Educational Technology. We've got a third group that's actually, I'm blanking on at the moment, and I apologize profusely to that group. But to all who are taking part in this, thank you very much for being part of the opportunity to exchange ideas. My name is Rushton Hurley. I am a former high school teacher of Japanese language, a former principal. I teach at Foothill College here in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. And I run a little nonprofit called Next Vista for Learning, nextvista.org. Tell you a little bit more about that towards the end of the presentation, but let's just kind of jump into some of the pieces here. And in jumping into these pieces, I should start with just the idea that we got some good news, right? Got some good news, and in thinking about the experience that we have had with the pandemic, good news has been a little hard to come by on many fronts, but I think there are also plenty of pieces that we can look at, and we can understand that the good news is something that is much more than just a momentary, oh, that's nice, right? Specifically, you look at what we've experienced over the last year, and there has been a tremendous amount of stress, right? We've been kind of deep into a lot of uncertainty, and the good news that we're going to start with is this. When I think back to the questions that have represented the uncertainty for a school that I spend a lot of time with. So I'm a nonprofit guy. I'm kind of the outsourced instructional tech person for a school up the peninsula, and have guided them with a lot of the things that we've done related to adjusting to the last year. And there were these big questions out there for us. So in March of last year, how do we switch over, right? I think the last day we saw our students was something like March the 4th, could have been. And then we thought we were going to have more time to do some more preparation, and didn't turn out that way, right? So this whole thing of how do we teach online? Well, we'd had enough time to hit the ground running. So rather than choosing to, like, hey, we'll just kind of move a vacation forward in order to figure some things out, we were ready to start. I mean, there was kicking, there was screaming, but we were ready to start. So in terms of how to teach online, was it easy? No. But did we do it? We did. And we didn't wait until the fall. We did. During the summer, there is that question of like, are we going to be back in person? Are we going to continue to be online? What's this going to be? That represents more uncertainty. And there's a lot of stress related to how people see those issues, right? What is it? What is it that we're going to face? Well, pretty soon into the summer for us, it was like, all right, we're going to be online. And that allowed us to really zero in on what we wanted to do. And then finally, like late last year, okay, once we start bringing some kids back, what does hybrid teaching look like? If we've got some kids in the room and some kids at home, how do we make that work? And we largely figured that out. Now, why does this represent good news? Those are our possibilities, right? It's not as if there's going to be something new that crops up that brings a totally new set of questions about how we can work. Essentially, it's either you're back online or you can be in person to some degree. So having that in front of us is good news, and having that good news is a good thing. But when we think about the good news, there's also what we'd call normal. And one major piece of discussion about that will hit kind of again and again as we go through this particular session is the idea of normal is just behind us, right? So those who are like, it'll be good to get back to normal. I'll explain why I think normal is behind us over the course of the presentation. But more to the point, you see, we're evolving as teachers, and what does that mean to evolve? And in one way, I think it means something that we've been thinking about as educators for a long time, which is if we're trying to improve our systems, then what do teachers need to do? And some of those things have been fairly obvious. Ramp up active learning. All right. So Susan and I were talking about this before we got started, right? Just like active learning makes a difference. If you're just like wah, 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 then that's not inspiring. But if you have people engaging in ideas in ways that maybe they haven't before, that's active. That represents a step forward. We've also learned that flexibility, all right, makes a big difference, right? So you think about what it means to ask questions about how do we assess students? How do we do this? Maybe there are things we've been doing at any level where it's just been part of our pattern. And we said, okay, all right, so I'm going to give these quizzes in this way. I've got these worksheets, whatever it might be. That's something that we've largely set aside because it's become more obvious over the last year what really doesn't work, which brings us to the third piece, which is we're talking about what really works. And I think that element of talking about what works is one of the reasons that we've got good news to work with. So many, many more teachers are ready to engage in ideas now that will allow us to make our places of learning, whether that's a physical place or an online place, make that into something that can truly be inspiring for students. And also, families have experienced this as well. So they are ready to engage in these ideas. How is it that we're going to be able to do what we do going forward? What is it that my child is experiencing? So with that, what I want to do is talk about the idea of ready from this standpoint. I'm going to ask you several times over the course of this session to share some things in the chat. And the very first thing I'd like you to share, and if you're watching this recording, you just think it out there, and that's totally fine. What percentage of your students is struggling? So you think about, your students and what they experience as a part of your teaching. What percentage seems to be struggling with the circumstances that we have at the moment? So looking at the chat for some numbers, just toss that in as a wild guess. Maybe for you, it's somewhere in 80%. Maybe it's just 5%. Something along those lines. The first answer says 40%, right? Degree of suffering. Well, we could spend the rest of the session talking about exactly what we mean by that, but interpret it as you will. So if what we're doing is we're talking about struggling students, that they're finding it hard to do what you want them to do for your class, what percentage are we talking about? And so far we're averaging out around 40%, let's just say. All right. And if that's the case, then all right, fair enough. Struggling is very real, right? So when we think about students having difficulty with that, let's look at this from the very specific standpoint of what it is we're experiencing right now. And when we talk about people struggling, I think it is safe to say that we're talking about a group that may not overlap precisely with the group of students who were suffering before the pandemic. So if we think back to what school was before, in the before times, we'll call it, are people having trouble? Yes. Is it the same group of people that were having trouble before? Not necessarily. And so that means that we're facing something very different. And I would also ask you to think about this. Who's thriving? So Dr. Butler says, it varies because I teach both adult learners and traditional college students. Right. So you might start thinking, well, for adult learners, it represents this percentage that is struggling. For my traditional college students, it represents this percentage. There are also those who are thriving. Now, we spend a lot of time in media, all right, focusing on the struggling, and rightly so. I mean, it has been awful for a lot of families. As we recognize, the younger the student, the more difficult it has been for a distance learning environment to be one that works well for them. There are people who do it well, even at, say, the K-2 level, but it is hard. It's very, very hard. But when we talk about the idea of students thriving, what are we talking about there? So, for example, here's a quote from a student, from a student at a school where I work. I realize I'm talking about anecdotes, but let's just take a look. I would take doing much more partner work, as that has helped me to learn while at home much easier than just doing solo work. How long have we been talking about this, right? You think about job interviews. We're looking to just hire someone for our team. So show us your record of working completely on your own. Eesh. Right? That's one of those things where teachers have embraced more of a flexible approach, have said, hey, I'm going to have people work together in these ways, using collaborative tools in this fashion. By getting into that space of saying, I think I can have people approach things in a way that is more interesting for them, in a way that is more valuable for them in terms of their learning, that's no small thing. As a high school person, I look at this next quote. During distance learning, the new time schedules are really helpful in saving time and giving students more time to sleep. What? Teens do better when they've had enough sleep? Write this down, right? So yes, when we think about what it is that allows a student to thrive, there are elements of this whole pandemic experience we've had that have allowed some students to do far better. Some of those students, for example, are students who found the physical environment to be a place of repeated experiences of bullying. And maybe being at home has allowed them to thrive in ways they haven't before. So a lot of different possibilities for how we see this. Now, as I talk about, this is a central element to the argument that I'm making, that there are students who thrive. And if you would, go ahead and put in the chat, what percentage of your students would you say is thriving in distance learning? Now, I get it. You may be in an environment where people aren't doing distance. They're just showing up with masks, whatever it may be. But what percentage would you say is thriving? And let's kind of think through that as a possibility. I don't want to talk about this without recognizing the danger that focusing on success might diminish how very hard this has been for those who are struggling, right? But again, it's a different set of kids, right? By and large. And when I say kids, could be talking about 4-year-olds, it could be talking about 40-year-olds, right? In adult ed programs. So Carrie, for example, says about 50% are thriving, right? That's no small amount. And when you look at what people experience, and especially if you look at it from, say, the quick K-12 angle, if you have students who are thriving for any given reason, any reason at all, they're thriving. Once we're post-COVID, how are they going to do? If we're bringing them back into exactly the same environment that we had pre-COVID, and they have experienced thriving, what happens? So let's look at the numbers. Dr. Butler says, adult learners, about 60% are thriving. With the traditional students, about 35%. Makes sense. All right, and the numbers are going to differ according to the level, to environment, to the comfort with online tools, a lot of different pieces. But it does give us a good point of departure as we talk about what it is that we see as important about what to learn from our experience in the pandemic. All right, another thing that we realize from what we're experiencing now, right, beyond the whole struggling and thriving piece, is that equity is a whole lot of hard work. So in the chat, if you would, a yes or a no, has your school managed to get access or devices to everyone who needed it? All right. So a yes or no in the chat on that front. You think about this from the, it doesn't matter what grade level we're talking about, but if somebody needs access, do they have the ability to get it? The answer is yes. All right. We've been able to do that. Right. and everybody else just toss in, and you might be like, well, everybody, like wherever you are on that works fine. But you think back to what happened last March in some settings. In some settings here in California, for example, there were people who, out of a concern for equity, I don't question their heart on this, but they said, hey, we've got students who don't have access. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that no one gets hurt as a result of whatever we try to do going forward through the remainder of the semester. Your grades can't go down. Now, in my mind, the fairly predictable outcome of that was students who are like, wait, so if I've got an A, I don't have to do anything the rest of the semester? Right, we want you to still work, but it can't hurt your grade. They're like, great, see you in the fall. And so what did that mean? It means that a lot of students didn't have a lot of practice working with online learning in ways that might have helped them coming into this school year. It means that a lot of teachers had to focus on tracking people down because they're not responding, because why should they? They've already got their grade they want or whatever. A lot of good practice got lost in that setting. The hard work of equity says we're going to figure out what it takes to get access and devices into the hands of those who need it. That's the hard work. And the districts and the schools that did that ended up in a much, much better space because they were able to start early with what is it that we can do with this environment, that whole piece of learning what's possible. And so a lot of divide issues, may well have been addressed as a function of taking on the hard work of equity, but it moves us in the right direction. Next piece that we're getting from now, and that is that there is a clear issue related to the need for improvement. Now, improvement's one of those words, right? If we ask for a vote, do you vote for or against improvement? You're going to get 100% in favor of improvement. If you ask for or against change, now we might have a slightly different number. And of course, there's a logical issue involved. If we're in favor of improvement, but not in favor of change, then something's up. But, you think about the people that you work with. You always have people who are looking for possibilities. What can I bring to what I do? What can I use to help this become clearer to students, to inspire their sense of possibilities? You always have those people. And you also have those folks who would tell you that behind every silver lining, there's a dark cloud. And those folks are out there as well, fair enough. But while what we have right now is exhausting, just learning during the pandemic is exhausting for all of us, it is. Nevertheless, more teachers have made more progress with learning technologies than ever before, right? Ever. And that is no small thing for figuring out what it is that's important to us. I was talking to one of my teachers recently, and he said this: I'm more organized than I've ever been. And that sense of what's possible once you get past the day-to-day, just trying to stay focused enough to put out the fires. No, I'm more organized. That means being able, or at least, like the possibility of putting more energy into, what might I do that takes everything up a notch in terms of the fascinating, the interesting, the inspiring, and bringing that into what we do is something that I think is really, really powerful. The truth is that low engagement instruction leads to all kinds of issues: management, mediocrity. Those two things. I mean, no matter the level, management, less of an issue at the upper level, just because people tend to be a little more polite about it. Kids will run wild and give them the chance, right? So what does that mean? Well, academic mediocrity, talking about mediocrity, academic mediocrity for students, and perhaps professional mediocrity for teachers, if we're talking about low engagement instruction. So that whole question of what works, what makes for more active learning, how do we ramp things up in some interesting way? How do we assess in such a way that is truly part of letting students see possibilities within the content? That is a different issue. Final bit, maybe final bit, I think final bit for what we got going right now is this, right? I would say that when we look at connections and talents, now we are beginning to ask some really interesting questions of each other. I'll ask you this. I want you to think about your own school setting, whether you are teaching graduate school or pre-kinder, right? Whatever it is, yes or no in the chat. Have you made something new and dynamic happen this year? Or has one of your colleagues done something that made you go, that was awesome? All right, so yes or no. All right, do you feel like, hey, yeah, something new and dynamic has happened as a part of this year? All right, so I'm seeing a number of yeses pop in. If you perhaps asking it the way I am makes no, like something people like don't know that I need to tell everybody that. Fair enough. All right, but Carrie, Sarah, everybody, all right, good, good, good. All right, good. Now, what does that mean? Like tapping connections for this. Well, for us, for example, yes, Zoom fatigue is real, fine. But we have also brought to our students voices that they normally would not hear before. So using Zoom, which everybody knows how to use now, my little online Rotary Club, the Rotary E Club of Silicon Valley, right? We've been using Zoom for years. And then suddenly everybody else, kind of jumps on like, hey, we can use this. Yeah. What does that mean? We have brought voices to our students, voices from Hong Kong, Canada, Tanzania, Germany, Nigeria, South Africa. We even had like an English minister of parliament talk to some of our students. That's cool stuff. That's really cool stuff. Whenever you can vary the voice in the classroom, you introduce possibilities for people making new connections. That's really interesting. It's interesting to expand strengths. What is it that you've brought to your in-person teaching for years and years and years that you're like, I really miss that? Great. Now we're having a conversation together where we stop and we say, how do we make that work in a distance environment? How do we use that to expand it so that it reaches more and more students? What is possible? And that kind of thing of getting students to begin showing mastery in new ways, where they're beginning to see, hey, I really like what this is. Why do they like it? Why do they know? Because the teacher said, maybe we can try it this way. Maybe the teacher is now a person who says, I'm going to give this a shot and let's just see how that works. And that by itself generates a better rapport in a classroom, as opposed to, never wanting to admit fault or anything, or that something didn't go well. That's just not how the world works. So if what we have are people that our students are essentially like, we're figuring this stuff out together, that sense of connection, that's a really cool thing. So there's a lot about the current environment that has worked well for us. So when I think about all of this and I think, okay, here I'm doing this session on post-COVID schooling, right? Will your school be relevant? What does that mean in terms of what you need to do? So I do have like this one huge suggestion that I think is powerful. We'll explore it a bit and then get into the most the scariest piece of the why, all right, as we get into that. So the first element is this: put together a brainstorming team. All right. So this is a group of people who get together and they say, what if? What if? What might we do? How might we fill in the blank? And I think getting those kinds of folks together to begin looking at some ideas is a really, really cool and interesting way to begin seeing where people go from I have a job to I am engaged in making this a cool personal and professional environment for everybody. So, for example, when you think about the idea of starting to bring ideas forward, little things become important. So, by the way, if you are a leader, a team leader of some kind, you are a school leader of some kind, campus leader, I encourage you to ask not for good ideas, but for crazy ideas, right? Crazy ideas is a better request than good ideas. Why is that? Because if you ask people for good ideas, they're not going to give you much because they're not sure that their ideas are good. Maybe it's not good. He asked for good ideas. I don't know, right? But if you ask for crazy ideas, anything's fine. And and maybe someone says something and everybody's like, that's funny. And then somebody says, why not? Why not? And so then you begin exploring the things that begin to drive us, to excite us about what our learning environments can be. So so the next thing I'm going to ask you to do is in the chat. I'm about to put up an image, all right? And this image represents a staff lounge or a staff room. And if what you see in the image is more like yours, then on a 1 to 10, if it's like that's our room, then put a 10. If you're like, that's nothing like our staff space, then put a 1. Interpret that however you will, but the idea is just to kind of get that. So 1 to 10, where 10 is this is exactly like ours, 1 is not at all. Here you go. How's that? Staff room. All right, in the chat, a 1 to 10, where 1 is that's nothing like our area, 10 is like, oh, nope, that nails it. That's our staff room right there. So looking for some numbers in the chat, I'm hoping you'll humor me on this. 3, all right, good. All right, so So we've got some answers here that essentially suggest this is not what you're dealing with, which is a blessing from the heavens, because this to me is the kind of thing that would suck the soul right out of you. But if you're asking for ideas, somebody might step forward with this thought. They might come forward and say, hey, you know what we need for a staff room? We need this. Yes or no in the chat. You're good with this idea. Like if this were your staff room, this is where you and your colleagues would get together. I see a yes. All right. And anybody else like this looks like, or like, no. That is not at all like what I would like in a staff room, right? No no's so far. Looks good to me. All right, says Susan. Right. Dr. Butler says maybe. All right, depends on what they serve. Fair enough. But when you look at something like this, if you are the leader, you might be in a space where you say something like, yeah, we're not going to make that happen in the next in the next few weeks. But is there an intermediate step? So for example, for your team, how hard is it to make sure there's some gourmet coffee there, at least once a week? How hard is that? If you're coming together, if you are in a space where you physically meet, why not have some gourmet coffee? Why not? Is that going to bust your budget? I'm guessing no. And it shows that you're willing to say, okay, here's the idea. Let's figure out what the steps are. We may or may not get to that ultimate idea, but if we can move in a direction that makes everybody feel a little bit better about what we got going on, all the better. So now, once we talk in that fashion, we're really in this space of thinking, what's possible? What if? How might we? And so one of the things I want to do is, I want you to add to the chat, maybe over the next couple of minutes. I'll just keep presenting, but add to the chat if you're up for it. Something that for you would be just a crazy cool addition to what you experience in your work setting, right? What would you love to see added to your campus, to your university, to your elementary school, whatever it might be? A nap room, amen, right? With cats, that you can pet and they'd purr while you take a nap. That'd be all right. All right. Anything else, like that kind of comes to mind on that? Just toss it in as we go. So at the school where I spend a lot of my time, I suggested that we have what we have come to call the R&D team. And we've come up with loads of ideas. A full quarter of the staff joined a completely optional group for sharing ideas on what things could be going forward. It needs to be optional because people are often so stressed with the current environment that, one more thing is just no. So the optional piece, we had a lot of people sign on. Great. I want to just go through some of our ideas. So this is a high school, right? And let's just kind of take a look at it. So one of the ideas was, hey, let's get beyond the bell. Can we offer like really cool speakers at other times? Can we create the conditions through which we move learning from a did I or didn't I get my grade to that really fascinates me, right? Can we get students more and more in that mode? So that was one piece. Another is we thought, it would really be excellent if every time a student was doing an interesting project, they had a place to go for really cool ideas. Cool is one of those things. I don't think we spend enough time talking about the pedagogical importance of fun and cool, just my opinion. And so if they can come to, say, the library, and the library is a place where they can be like, here's a cool idea, here's a cool idea, here's a cool idea, and they can begin developing their skills, speaking to validity of sources, the kind of information that's available for what they're bringing into their project, so that we're helping them gain skills that often students wouldn't get until they're well into college, all the better, right? We also, as a school for which community service is an important thing, we started saying, well, how do we like do tech-enabled service? So these elderly folks who have been disconnected from their family and friends for the last year, can we have students who regularly connect with them and check in, see how they're doing, tell them about what's going on at school? Why not, right? There's all kinds of possibilities for tech-enabled service. You just have to decide it's important to do. And so now we're thinking, all right, yeah, maybe we've got people who can tutor others. Maybe there's a lot of possibility for kids who have gotten to where they can use Zoom, but they need some help. Maybe we've got some students who can help, that kind of thing. Why not connect with more schools internationally? And like I was talking about before, we've started some really cool projects along these lines. Doing a program with a school in Nigeria and actually like Maiduguri, which is northeast Nigeria, which is a place that has its own challenges, as does everywhere. And we did a real cool project with a school in Cape Town, South Africa as well. And why not do more and more of this? Because we can. We have more of our people used to the technologies that allow this to happen. So why not do more things like that? Which led to a question about, well, why not a teacher exchange? So if we're connected to the school in South Africa, how about at the end of their school year in December, they have their end of the year thing, and then before they get started again in February, one of their people comes and spends a couple of weeks with us, and we have, we house them with one of our teachers or school families or something. And, they spend time, interacting with students and connecting with people and sharing ideas. And then at the end of our school year, we send somebody down there to do the same thing. Because now we're just down to the cost of the flight. If we've got the lodging, the most expensive piece of it, typically for a longer period, handled, then and maybe somebody's like, I've got so many frequent flyer miles, we just use those. You never know. You never know. Why not let these things happen? And so if what we're trying to do is create an environment that is more personally and professionally satisfying for everybody, these what if questions become really, really important for getting people into a space where what they're doing is creating stories. So the more that we do something with the school in Nigeria, the more that we have speakers connect with us at interesting times. And it turns out that we had 80 students show up, and we had good question after good question after good question. And they're teens, and who knew, right? All of this kind of stuff becomes the stories that allow you to let your community know what your school is truly about. So no matter the level of your school, no matter the level, if you don't tell your stories, others will, and they may or may not actually stick to the facts as they do so. So pulling those stories together becomes really important for how we let the community know who we are, which brings us to the challenge, the big whopping challenge in terms of relevancy going forward. And that is that there is new competition. Like, what do you mean new competition? Well, online schools. Well, no, wait, we've had online schools for a while. And some of you probably work at online schools. I don't mean like online currently, but online schooling. And, yes, a lot of online schools out there are glorified correspondence courses. Yes. But everybody has been dabbling in this over the last year. More and more people have figured out how to do it really, really well and do really dynamic learning. And if you've got that percentage of students who are thriving that we talked about before, and you go back to doing what you did before that may not be as interesting to your students or their families, it doesn't mean that everybody has to create a new dynamic learning environment. All you need are one or two schools that have the ability to scale up with some really interesting dynamic learning, who start telling the world, hey, we've got fantastic online learning at our school, come join us. And what if you lose 20% of your students? What does that do to your funding? Who do you have to lay off? Now, the good news is that you are already in a good position with your students. Personal connections, sense of community, sense of history. These pieces are very, very important. But do you tell the stories in such a way that it factors in for people? Are you finding ways to bring the strengths of the last year forward so that you can show these families, hey, we've got these new offerings as a result of what we learned? That is no small thing. And you have to be ready to have some really good conversations about what that can mean. So as you think about these pieces, what we want to do is we want to stop and say, all right, we got a lot of listening to do. We're looking for really cool ideas. We're looking for the steps forward. We're asking our students questions like, what from this last year should we keep going forward? We're asking each other what really, really works. And ultimately, we end up with this, this realization that we're in a distinctive time. That is not, the profound result of brain surgery intelligence. This is a crazy time, and so people are prepared via their experiences to engage in a conversation about systemic change. Now, some will leap in, and others will say, I just need to get back to what I knew. All right, if they do that really, really well, so be it. But as a community, do you offer things to those who might be looking for something a little more interesting? So thinking about this, I want us to kind of move in the direction of any questions you might have. I will be here until 3:50 Mountain Time, for sure. And I want to engage in some shameless plugs because I might have some things that are real interesting to you. That includes, for example, talking a little bit about a newsletter I put out. There's an example, the one that comes from April. If you like it, go ahead and sign up. Boom, right there. There's a link for it as well. But my little nonprofit is one that loves to highlight creative approaches to teaching and learning. And so anything that you or your students put together, just short videos that will allow people to go, oh, that's a cool way of thinking about that. We'd love to highlight it in some fashion. Everything in our library is completely free. There are no ads. You don't even need to sign up for an account. It's just a little save the world thing that I got going. And we have videos about academic topics, about communities around the world, about service to others. We've got videos about careers. We've got videos to help English language learners. We call it the EL Project, or as I like to call it, L Project, right? And lots and lots of material that I'd be happy to share with you. It is all freely available. So I hope you will give that a look. We do contests where we ask students in 90 seconds or less to creatively explain something one might encounter in school. And so, we get some gems of videos on that. If you're like, I would love to see some really clever student creative videos, you let me know. I am happy to send you links, sets that might be interesting, anything like that. Another contest we have is the service via video. We do it every year. And in this contest, students tell about people or organizations in their community who make life better for others. And we get some gems that way also. So feel free to give those a look. I do quite a bit of writing. I say quite a bit. My blog I have multiple posts a year. You might say that's a little vague. Yes, I am not as prolific as some. Let's just put it that way. But hopefully the content that's there is valuable to you. Written a number of books. One called "Making Your Teaching Something Special," which is all about the little ways to get better at what you do. I broke it into 5 categories: rapport, assessments and assignments, delivery, professionalism and collegiality, and logistics. And so if that's of interest, give it a look. I'm happy to stay in touch with you about it, that kind of thing. Another one called "Making Your School Something Special," which is about fostering and sharing stories of success and using that as fodder for PD and PR. And for the National Catholic Education Association, I wrote one called "Technology, Teamwork, and Excellence," which is for leaders. If you are not Catholic, you can still read that book and hopefully get loads out of it. But I hope that those books might be valuable. What I earn from my writing goes towards my little nonprofit effort to save the world. So feel free to help me out there. All right, I am going to wind things down and then open it up for questions and hang out with anybody who has that desire to say, hey, so let's talk a little bit about this. Happy to do it. First of all, my email, rh@nextvista.org. I answer every email I get eventually. There is the video library at nextvista.org. I'm on Twitter at RushtonH, RushTonH. I was a little late to Instagram, so I'm at Rushton Was Taken. Get it? And what that is mostly travel photography. I work with teachers and school leaders around the world. And so I try to take pictures of the cool places and share them. The 5-day challenge sounds like some kind of a cleanse, but what that is an opportunity for instructors to take just a blog post that has 2 possibilities in it. And you just choose one and you try it out and then you talk about it like a day later. So it's just all free stuff for learning how to try little things to improve what you do. My writing is at rushtonh.com/writing. Loads and loads of tech resources at nextvista.org/resources. And then there's my newsletter, which I put in the chat a minute ago, nextvista.org/newsletter or newsletter-sign-up. Either way will work. And then these slides. So you can get to these slides at tinyurl.com/rh-elcc21. Capitalization does not matter with tinyurl, so you know. I finish my newsletter the same way every month, and I will finish the formal part of this session with the same line now. May you inspire and be inspired each and every day. Thank you so much for joining this session, and I hope you got some good ideas out of it. As I said, I'll stick around and talk to anybody who has a question. So feel free. Dr. Butler, thank you for coming. All right, you are very welcome. And feel free to getting some love there, in the reactions as well. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you for being there, Carrie. All right, all good. And feel free if you want to unmute and just say, "Hey, Rushton, you got a question?" I'm happy to talk with you about ideas. You might be like, "Oh, I just had this thought I need to share with the world." Now's your chance. So feel free to do that as well. All right, what I'm going to do, oh, thank you, Carrie. I am going to stop sharing so we can just kind of all see each other. We got a little group here that might carry on the conversation. And if you need it back up, just let me know. Susan, by the way, thank you very much for moderating.
You're so welcome.
Yeah, snaps to you. Okay.